Hey everyone, welcome. We're so glad you're here today with us. We'll give all our guests just a minute or two to get settled and join the room. So feel free to grab a coffee, water, or whatever makes you feel comfortable. And while we are waiting, quick sound and video check. Can you all hear and see me okay? Just drop a quick yes or emoji in the chat and let me know that everything is working good on your end. Okay, thank you. While we are waiting, a quick hello from me. My name is Natalie and I will be your host for today's session. I'm a custom onboarding manager here at SumSub. And whether you are joining from work, home, or somewhere in between, thanks for spending this time with us. We have a poll running now, and we would really appreciate that if you could let us know how familiar you are with the travel rule. Okay, I see that people started to answer this question. Thank you, guys. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we dive in. First, this session is being recorded, so if you need to hop off early or want to revisit anything later, we've got you covered. We'll send the replay link within the next 24 hours. Of course, feel free to use the chat to say hi, share where you're running in and from, and ask questions throughout the workshop. We would love to hear from you. And there will also be a Q&A session at the very end. And if something comes to your mind in mid-session, just drop it in the Q&A box, and we will answer these questions later. You can also vote for the questions that you like, and we will cover the most popular ones at the very end. I see that more and more people are joining, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm excited to introduce to you our speakers for today. They are really true experts when it comes to the travel rule, with a wealth of knowledge and hands-on experience. Today, they will walk us through the solution, share the key insights, and offer valuable perspectives from the field. Please welcome my colleagues, Alvaro and Emeka. Hey, guys.
Hi, everyone.
Very nice to meet you all. Hope you're doing very well. Good to see all of you. See quite some people join today. Yeah, I guess Natalie, we can probably start introducing ourselves. So my name is Alvaro. I'm the transaction monitoring team lead for the technical integration of the solution here at SumSub. Both for transaction monitoring and just travel rule generally, anything relating to the technical aspects and to any integration insights. So that's why I'm here to assist you with perhaps any technical questions you might have as well, and improve the, let's say, easiness of the integration stage for everybody. So yeah, very nice to meet you. I'll hand over to Emeka as well.
Yep. Hi, guys. My name is Emeka, and I'm a senior PM here at SumSub, quality responsible for travel rule. My role is more about ensuring that we're building the right product, and the product is, serving your needs. So improvements, fixes, and just like general improvements as well for the solution. Those are pretty much like my day-to-day activities.
Okay, thank you for this quick introduction. I suggest covering a bit our agenda for today. So we will cover today onboarding process for WASPs, overview of the existing rule bundles and their use cases, basic system setup to ensure smooth implementation, and of course, we will finish up with Q&A session to address all the questions that you will have. Okay, guys, so the floor is yours.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. So, in terms of the onboarding process, the way that we at SumSub typically onboard VASPs is through something called a registration form. This is a very short form that I will show in a minute, that basically just gets details about the company. So your company, which is registered, and does some screening to understand, your activity level, what licenses you have, and if there are any AML hits on your company. That is the first level of the onboarding process. The second level is something we call a travel role due diligence questionnaire. Now, this is a more advanced questionnaire that you typically fill once you have been onboarded as a VASP just before you go live. So the registration form, like I mentioned, would give you access to the full functionality of the solution, will enable you to start integrating, start sending messages. And then the full due diligence form is a form that will solidify your position in the ecosystem, but then also give you additional benefits like showing you're trustworthy and allowing you to communicate with VASPs on other connected protocols that we have, like GTR and code. So in a few moments, you would see my screen and you will basically see what the form looks like. Now, one thing to note, and I will just make this bigger so it is very, very clear, is the first step of this form is basically for whoever is filling it on behalf of your company to accept the agreement here. You can click and read the agreement and just confirm this. You're duly authorized to register the VASP into the ecosystem. Once that is done, the next page will show some basic information about the company. So here you'll be expected to enter your company name. In this case, I would use SumSub, and a country location. So I would say United Kingdom. We would find the company and we would give you options based on our search on like public registries and so on and so forth to select your company. If your company isn't listed here, you would have the option to enter this data manually. Here, however, we're going to pick the first option and then proceed. So here we already see some pre-filled information, and we'll be required to enter a company email. We would also be required to enter a company website. And lastly, we would be required to enter some information about like our license status, what protocols we currently use, and something called our legal entity identifier. These last three fields are optional, but we do recommend that you fill them out before you get started. Once that's done, I would simply click save and continue, and we would automatically verify your profile. What this means, or when this happens, you will get an email, and from that email, you will be able to get access to the system and begin to onboard. Again, if you have a customer support officer as well, you can also reach out to them to ensure that you've been onboarded successfully. Now, that is the first stage. That is the registration form. Very simple, short and easy, straight to the point. The VASP due diligence form, however, is a bit longer, so I wouldn't go into that in detail on this call. But the key things I want to highlight that we ask for there are a few more information about, your company's, for example, data protection policies, your company's AML policies. If you have been, if there have been any infringements in the past, information about the UBOs, and then more specific information about the type of business that you do. If you're a VASP, are you just an exchange? Are you an OTC? Are you a crypto lender? And do you do on-ramp and off-ramp? That is the form where we go into detail to best classify you and also to validate a lot of the documents and so that you would send to us. So that is high level what onboarding looks like. Again, to summarize, the first step is to fill the registration form, which will give you full access to the dashboard and the functionality to begin integrating. While the next step is just before you go live, you should fill out the due diligence form to access more functionality in the product, but then to also show that you are credible to other members of the ecosystem. So that's the first part. Just once again, just chipping in, if there are questions, please use the Q&A session. I can see we already have a few questions, so please keep them coming. We will attend to them at the end of the webinar. So the next thing we can go over is what are the rules and what they typically look like. So on a non-technical basis, a lot of travel rule integrations and behaviors typically happen based on pre-configured settings. In this case, we call them rules. Now, these rules are what we have been broken down first of all based on jurisdiction, but then also based on country requirements and certain scenarios that could happen in the travel rule process. So, for context, when we think of the travel rule process and what it is simply the exchange of information from one VASP to another. However, there might be cases where, for example, we can't identify who the other VASP is, or we can identify that VASP, but the VASP is non-communicative, or we can identify the VASP communicates, but the VASP sends us wrong data. These are all scenarios that the different rules are meant to handle. So very quickly, I would show you again high level, and I'm going to zoom out a bit just so again it's very, very transparent to you, some of these rules. So if I search for travel rule, we can see that we have rules that are catering to different jurisdictions. So we have rules catering to the Dubai region, the EU region, India, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, South Africa, Turkey, UK, and so on and so forth. Now, these rules have been directly translated from the guidelines and requirements, but they are only meant to act as a template, a starting point. If you still wanted to modify some of these rules to fit your risk settings, that is possible. We will not go over that on this call, but just to let you know that it is possible to still tweak these rules and they are not set in stone. For starters, I would look at our general travel rule bundle and just walk through a few rules here. So for example, the first rule here is related to UTXO transactions. How do we handle UTXO transactions in the context of travel rule? This rule typically handles that process, and then based on the configuration, can decide what wallet address to send to, and so on and so forth. We have a data exchange request rule, which is typically I would call it the foundational rule for travel rule. If this rule is installed, it tells the systems that this is a travel rule transaction and we're expected to do certain things in an order. So we're expected to find the VASP, we're expected to reach out to the counterparty VASP, and so on and so forth. And then we have some anti-fraud rules as well baked in. So for example, rules around the counterparty names, checking that the counterparty is not giving us fake names or names with numbers or names with symbols, and so on and so forth. And then if you think about it as well, we also have rules for wallet verification. So if that is legal in your jurisdiction, these rules would help you, again, identify that wallets are unhosted and generate unique links that you can share to your customer base to verify their unhosted wallets. And then based on that feedback, you will determine if the transaction will be approved and processed or rejected and halted. And just again, very high level, we have rules that cater to scenarios where we can't find the counterparty VASP, or where the counterparty VASP has said that the names does not match, or even where the travel rule has expired, the request has expired. Again, my colleague Alvaro would go into details about some of these nuances, but this is again very high level what it would look like. And this is the general travel rule bundle. If we go into specific country jurisdictions, for example, if we go into, let's say, Turkey, we will have rules around, amount thresholds, for example, for local transactions, or, thresholds for international transactions, or thresholds for transactions that are not from VASPs in travel rule regions as defined by the regulator. So I'll stop here for now, but the key takeaway from this session is to know that the rules, SumSub gives you a foundational level of rules to start with, These rules are being translated from the local requirements, but nonetheless, these rules are still editable by your team if you require some more modification or some more wrangling. I'll stop here for now, and I'll hand over to Alvaro to take us through the next parts of the session.
Amazing. Thanks, Emeka. Appreciate it. And I want to make an emphasis that I see a lot of questions. We're definitely going to answer all your questions. So we'll just probably take a couple more minutes to showcase you through some things that for us are important for you to know. And then we'll hop directly to all of your questions. So no worries about that at all. The only thing I'm going to walk you through now is basically some tips or recommendations from the technical perspective that could help you when it comes to integration, right? So let me share my screen. Okay, amazing. Hopefully you can all see my screen. So let's first start with, from the things that Emeka walked you through, obviously travel rule bundle, familiarize yourself a little bit with what each rule does, and what is the goal for you, let's say, for each of these rules, right? So that's obviously very, very important. Also, the important part here is you want to kind of try to see if you want to adapt some of these rules to your different requirements as well, right? For example, FATF blacklisted countries, let's say you click on this rule, we click on edit, you can see in the conditions that, if the country of the applicant is in the FATF blacklisted countries, like North Korea, Iran, and Myanmar, I believe, then, we'll stop scanning this transaction once this rule has matched, and we will directly reject, right? So here you can always add additional conditions. So, the interesting thing about this solution is that you can always kind of, adapt the rules to whatever requirements you have. So that's obviously very, very important. That's the first part. Second part is make sure you check your settings. So on your settings, you will see a couple of rules, for example, here, like such as request expired, for example, right? When you have a request awaiting the counterparty's response for a long time, you can determine the amount of time that your request is awaiting until you release it, right? So you can decide the time. That's also based on the jurisdiction, of course, and what you want to do after that time frame has expired. So under the settings here, you can first of all, let's say, decide what's going to be the time, okay, that you want this confirmation timeout, we call it, for the actual request to expire. You can define it there. Then you want to also emphasize here what is the data that you want to request from your originator, and what do you expect your user to fill out about the beneficiary, right? So again, according to your jurisdiction, you can say, okay, we expect full name, date of birth, place of birth, payment address, different things. No worries about more data that you might need not being here. We can adjust it in the rules. If you need more than this is more like a simplified interface. You can, if it has all the data here that you think you need, you can just do it here. Otherwise, in the rules, you probably notice we have not enough originator, not enough beneficiary, etc. We can always add additional things there, but this is quite simplified, so you have it quite easy, right? Now, this is some of the interesting stuff. Confirmation timeout, let's say 5 minutes. And then obviously also confirmation ownership mode. So this is the way that you want to validate incoming transactions. Do you want to do a full manual validation where you fully validate each incoming transaction regardless of the previous historical transactions? So regardless of whether you've received an incoming request for that address that you have or not, it can be more automated through these mechanisms. So for example, in simplified validation, anything from previous successful transactions, you store that data. You still have to validate ownership for new ones, but addresses that were there before, it will be automatically, like, let's say, verified, right? And then you have just full automated validation that's also from applicants and from previous transactions. So you can really decide here what you want to do there. Same with the email for counterparty verification. I think it's important to make clear how the SumSub, let's say, protocol does this attribution when you send, for for example, outbound request to your user sends some funds to a wallet address, right? What do we do? So first of all, we check through the relevant blockchain analytics providers to what VASP it belongs to, and we try to see what protocols, let's say, could be involved for the specific VASP. So is this VASP in our SumSub network? Is this VASP maybe in the GTR protocol? Is this VASP maybe in the code protocol? But also it could be that that VASP is not in any known protocol as of now and hasn't joined it. So we send what we call the email notification, right? And so that email notification, basically, you can be copied in BCC so that you can see the email that we sent to them, asking them to join our network in order to exchange that data, that one-time transfer of the data for free, let's say, just that one time. So there you can just put your relevant company email where you'll be copied, BCC'd into the actual request that we sent to the counterparty if they are not in any protocol. And I also want to say, before all of that, we also have our wallet address book, right? Which is essentially you can import in a hashed manner if you want also, in an encrypted way, your different wallet addresses so that we're aware of like perhaps addresses that haven't yet sent or received any funds from your side. And we can also do the same for other VASPs, right? So a lot of addresses are not going to be found by blockchain analytics providers because they might not have sent or received any funds. Constantly new addresses are made every day for different exchanges. So with the wallet address book, we try from our clients to kind of import the different addresses that they might have, just to have a common registry of the addresses that might belong to the different clients, and we'll run the addresses in your travel rule request through that wallet address book too, so that we don't miss out on data that blockchain analytics providers cannot identify because it's not on the blockchain yet, right? If you haven't received or sent anything. So that's kind of what these settings are as well. The last thing I'm going to say, because actually I want to focus most of this webinar on answering your questions, is I really highly recommend for you to familiarize yourself with this kind of link on how to submit transactions. If you already have access to our system, you can directly send data to your key, to your account, and test it by inputting some of the data. So you familiarize yourself with how to send different data and the different parameters that are required, right? So for example, like input in transaction ID, the transaction type, the direction, is it outgoing, is it incoming? Mostly when you're sending it via API, it will be outgoing. Currency type, all these kind of different things. Like, for example, most important stuff, counterparty objects, right? Like type of counterparty, what's the external user ID, what is the full name? Let's say we say a specific name. That's going to be a politically exposed person here. Inputting like account ID, and knowing that means this is a wallet address, payment method type crypto. So just you can familiarize yourself with the kind of JSON fields and API fields that we regularly use, so that it's easier to integrate when you're creating the rules. They're all mapped to these kind of fields, right? So that's also very, very important. So for example, if I now decide to send this transaction, you can basically directly send it to the system, right? So now I've sent it to the system, and now I will actually have it under my transactions right here. So, and then you can kind of test there, right? So that's always very, very handy. So I'm just going to send you, where's the chat? Or maybe Emeka, if you can send it, it's easier while I just kind of run through the last things there. But that's very, very useful stuff. And then there's a lot of documentation about the API references there. But as you see, my transaction has been sent here. And if I open it, one of the first thing I'm going to see is, well, obviously I've inputted an address that doesn't exist. So the first things you're going to notice is the travel rule status, right? This is very, very, very important. You need to be very aware of the difference between your transaction status and the travel rule status, right? So your transaction status under travel rule is simply the action that you want to happen based on different things, not only based on the travel rule status, but maybe based on the AML screening status, based on different things. The travel rule status is simply what is the status of the exchange of information process. Where's the status at right now? So for example, in this case, the travel rule status is counterparty VAS not found, simply because I've inputted an address that probably doesn't exist, very randomly created, let's say, and therefore the counterparty VAS was not found. However, something also interesting that you can always enable is the AML screening check for names. So this specific name right here that you see here, you can see that an AML check was triggered in the rules. You can also see travel rule counterparty AML screening hits to review. This means that if I open my AML screening, I'm going to be able to see that this user is a politically exposed person, adverse media, etc. It's up to you if you want to have this enabled or not. Of course, you can choose to enable it or not enable it. You might already be doing it with someone else. Totally fine. But you have that at your disposal by just activating that counterparty AML screening rule, right? So just bear in mind these kind of different things. Familiarize yourself a little with how to send the different data and the submitting transactions here. Familiarize yourself with, how the system works a bit. What are the rules? What are the different statuses here? This is the most important. What's the status of the actual transaction information? And those are some of the most important things from my side. So I think that actually that's probably the most important thing that I wanted to highlight. And let's maybe try to focus on answering most of your questions so that we can help you as much as we can with clarifying the travel rule integration. Let me just stop sharing.
Thank you, Alvaro. Okay, so I have a first question by Roman. Our tech team is planning to integrate SumSub travel rule for both incoming and outgoing transfers. As far as we understand, for outgoing transfers, SumSub provides pre-flight before transaction committed functionality via the send outbound travel rule message. For incoming transfers, SumSub provides post-flight after transaction committed functionality via the send inbound travel rule message. My question is post-flight the only available option for validating incoming transfers, or is it somehow possible to perform a pre-flight check for incoming transfers, similar to how it works for outgoing transfers?
This is an interesting question. I can start answering if you want, Mecca. Basically, there are different scenarios, and you're absolutely right that, of course, when we're doing outgoing, we can send the travel rule request. If you haven't released the funds yet, we send the travel rule request first to the counterparty VAS if they're in our system. They kind of decide if they have that information. The information is exchanged successfully, let's assume, and then the funds can be released, like pre-flight, like you're saying. Of course, for incoming, I have to say, it really depends, right? So for incoming, if it will depend on the counterparty, so the originator having sent the funds to you already or not, right? So if they've sent already the funds to you and you've received them through the blockchain, then that incoming kind of request, you will have to do it post, no matter what, right? It will depend on them, how they've decided to do it. But normally in our system, we have the possibility that if they're in the SumSub network, they can send you the request first before sending the funds. So you will automatically receive the request as an incoming transaction yourself in your dashboard. You will see the incoming request, and you can decide if you want to, if that information corresponds with the data that you have. And if everything is okay, then the funds can be released. So the same dynamic can happen, for incoming, but of course, the request needs to be sent first from the originator. So you're kind of course, depending on the originator, having to send you that request themselves first before actually processing the transaction. So that has to be taken into consideration. Hopefully that makes sense. Yes, exactly. Okay. I'll read this one out loud, and then maybe Emeka, you can take it if you like. So let's see. So if we are the beneficiary VASP in the incoming transaction scenarios, we receive the inbound travel rule message from SumSub, which triggered by counterparty VASP. And as a beneficiary VASP, we completed the travel rule message exchange process in the SumSub dashboard. then travel rule is fulfilled. The counterparty broadcasted transaction to blockchain and got confirmed. Question 1. Finally, when we, the beneficiary VASP, detected the incoming transaction from the blockchain, how do we link up the transaction hash with the previous SumSub travel rule message exchange? And 2, do we need to provide the counterparty VASP ID when submitting the transaction?
Yeah, so I can take this one. I think very, very good point that's been raised here. So in terms of how you as the beneficiary VASP can match, let's say, the inbound transaction that you receive beforehand to your current transaction, we do have an API that will be released shortly that would enable you kind of search by blockchain hash, for example, before you publish. Now, best practice is for you not to go ahead and create another transaction because that would just be two different transactions that you can no longer link. So in this scenario, the best use case practice and the way clients are currently doing this now, even though we do try to make it easier, is basically you have your transaction list or your transactions and process available to you, and you can query by certain parameters. But we're going to make that a lot easier, like in a couple weeks, so that it's very straightforward and you don't have to necessarily search each transaction for the blockchain hash, but you just do a general query, and then we would return this already exists on your account or you've already assigned this. So that would be the answer to that question. No need to include the VASP ID or anything like that in the payload, because again, our goal is to automate this for you as much as possible. And yeah, that's what we would do.
Okay, the next question is by Adriana. What about unhosted wallet transactions?
Yeah, that's a good one. So basically, I think probably most of you are aware, but we also have enabled unhosted wallet verification, right? So that's like an additional thing that you can enable through SumSub, which is essentially we're constantly doing the attribution for the addresses via the different things we explained, right? Via the wallet address book, via the different protocols, VASP attribution, etc. But there is the possibility of a high likelihood where what we are looking for in an address is just not found. The VASP has not been found. So we can assume quite likely that is going to be an unhosted wallet. And therefore, what we do is we can send the user that has decided to send the transaction to their, let's assume it's their own unhosted wallet, a link to our web SDK in SumSub where we give them the possibility to, let's say, connect their unhosted wallet and verify that transaction through their unhosted wallet. So we do that, let's say, through our own interface, and they can choose from a variety of more than 450 unhosted wallets like Exodus, MetaMask, a bunch of different ones. They can decide which one they have. They can click on it. It will take them directly to their unhosted wallet, and they can click on connect the wallet, and they will basically digitally sign that transaction to verify that is actually their unhosted wallet. Of course, here we are departing from the fact that we're assuming that the unhosted wallet belongs to the actual originator that is sending the transaction, because of course, if it's a third party, then it's slightly more complicated to reach out to this third party for them to verify it. But in that case, yeah. So that is what we have. We have basically the unhosted wallet verification process in the case where we cannot identify the address belonging to any VASP.
Yeah, I think just to add as well on that, like when it comes to like the wallet verification, we do support, like aside from supporting like over 400 wallets, we also support over 14 chains. So the major chains that you can think about: Solana, Bitcoin, Ethereum, ERC20 tokens, TON, and so on and so forth. We support those chains as well. And then we also have the option for, you could think about it like some of the lesser known chains or some of the chains where, let's say, they have wallet addresses which are not compatible with digital signatures. We also have fringe methods which we can use to verify those methods. So for example, we could use something like a self-declaration form if we can't support it, or if you wanted, we could also activate like a screenshot method for you. It does vary, but obviously based on like regulation, the most important and the most credible way to verify wallets is basically through digital signatures. Every other thing that you do when you can't sign a wallet address is more just a proof of concept that you did your best to validate the transaction.
Okay, the next one is, so if the company didn't join any network, basically we talk only about invitation kind of message, right? Could you please tell more on content? It doesn't breach GDPR rules, does it?
Yeah, so I can take this. So you're correct in the fact that it doesn't breach GDPR rules, and that's correctly because when we send out this email to the counterparty VASP, all that is in the email is simply an invitation and a link to register and become a VASP. So at no point do we send a like the personal information or the transaction information in the emails. We keep it strictly to being like an invitation email with a link to register. So yeah, that should answer your question. Again, like we've said, sometimes you might want to use this to prove to your regulator that you did your best. So, you can get logs of the emails that have been sent on your behalf, or as Alvaro showed earlier, you could also be blind copied in some of those emails so you can see, who we're sending it to, and so on and so forth on your behalf.
How do we indicate our own addresses so that other VASPs can see that the transaction isn't coming from us as a VASP?
So, yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
Yeah, I can take this. So this goes back to the first point of the webinar. So when you again fill the registration form and register, you're registered as a VASP in our system. What this means is that every single transaction sent from your key will come bearing your VASP name. So if the VASP is in our network, they would see on their dashboard that this transaction is from XYZ VASP. Again, if the VASP is not in our network, but is in a connected network like GTR or Code, they would see your VASP name. In the emails that we send on your behalf, they would also see your VASP name. So your name is mentioned at every point in time because we're doing the communication on your behalf. So that is something to note. However, you can't have a VASP and we can't interactions for you if you haven't already like onboarded successfully, which is why we started with that at the beginning of the webinar.
Okay. Could you demonstrate the minimum required set of rules and settings that are needed for the integration to work properly and travel rule information to flow between you and other CASPs, VASPs?
Yeah, if I can show you, I mean, it obviously there's no one kind of fixed way because it really depends on your own requirements. But I can show you like kind of the main things to look out for, right? So I'm just sharing my screen now. The main things to look out for during the actual integration that you need to be looking at is basically make sure that you're looking at if you have all your rules here. Let's assume just make sure that you're selecting the travel rule bundle, right? So the travel rule bundle has all of the basic rules that you need for the travel rule system to work and act accordingly in accordance with the basic rule functionality of the solution. So first you need to enable the pre-scoring rules. So most of these pre-scoring rules are quite important. For example, new travel rule data exchange request. This enables the actual process of the travel rule to work. It's like an activation. So this is definitely a must, let's say. UTXO transaction request is really depends on your type of model of transactions based on the crypto chain, etc. You need to decide, for example, if you want to install other pre-scoring rules, that's more up to you. You can also decide, do you want to conduct unhosted wallet verification? Is that something that, let's say, is a must under your jurisdiction? You have to consider that if you do have to do it, then it's worth installing unhosted wallet verification. You're enabling that actual verification to take place. Then you have other rules, for example, FCA watch list. Are you from the UK? Are you not from the UK? Is this important to you? The list of, let's say, unauthorized firms, warnings against entities, etc. According to the FCA, maybe yes, maybe not, right? So this will depend on whether for you that's important or not. Some other basic rules, though, that are important is counterparty VASP confirmed data mismatch, right? So this is a rule that will apply once the status of the travel rule says, for example, that the counterparty VASP doesn't have the corresponding the information that corresponds to the request you sent to them. So you say that you're sending a transaction where the expected beneficiary name is John Mayer, and then they see that and they say, I don't have any John Mayer, with this address. So counterparty VASP confirmed data mismatch. So this rule will trigger if you decide to install it. So some of these are quite basic, and you definitely need to install it, right? Travel rule sunrise VASP. Do you want to establish a rule that will put transactions on hold or take a specific action? Let's say if the VASPs are in a sunrise jurisdiction, So all these different things will really depend on your needs. But the most basic ones, are the ones that are stemming from the result of the travel rule status. So counterparty VASP confirmed data mismatch. For example, customer name mismatch from your side when you receive it, not enough originator info, not enough beneficiary. These are all quite important. Counterparty VASP did not respond. So all of the ones that have to do with the travel rule statuses are recommended for you to install, so that you can kind of see as well from the rule standpoint what's taken place, and especially so you can decide what you want to be the actions as a result of these statuses. Basically, these are kind of a reflection of the travel rule statuses, and you need to decide if those travel rule statuses take place, what actions do you want to stem from them, right? So those are the most important things. But if you firstly want it to work properly, you need to make sure that the appropriate pre-scoring rules here, especially, are also installed, right? So as I said, travel rule exchange request, very important. And then, you from there, you also need to decide if, for example, you want to do, let's do here AML as an example. So travel rule counterparty AML screening, right? Do you want to screen the names of the counterparties that your users are sending funds to against, Comply Advantage or whatever provider is going to check for adverse media, sanctioned entities, etc., right? The actual names. If you do, you have to install this pre-scoring rule as an example. So just bear in mind, differentiate, first of all, between pre-scoring rules that are just not really rules taking actions. It's more enabling. You're just enabling a feature, versus the actual rules here, which are not pre-scoring. They're just rules that are inputting actions on your transactions as a result of travel rule statuses. So those are the most important things. So put it simply, just go to travel rule basic bundle. You will have the most basic rules that will ensure functionality there. And from there, decide the actions that you want, and have a look at the pre-scoring rules to see if it all matches your needs. Maybe if you don't want a hosted wallet, you don't need to install this one, right? You could deactivate it. So really depends on you, but make sure you always check the travel rule bundle. That's the basic functionality. So hopefully that's clear.
Thank you, Alvaro. If the VASP is not within the SumSub network, does it need to pay any costs to register?
No, it is totally free.
For the exchange of that specific information, by the way.
If a transaction travel rule message goes on hold and the SumSub expiration timeout is set to 2 minutes, will it expire if the AML officer doesn't review it within that time? Just want to confirm whether the transaction will be automatically expired or cancelled if not manually processed within the given timeout.
Yeah, so I can take this one, Alvaro. That's fine. So when we talk of the confirmation timeout, what we refer to is and this is all automated. So at this point, there is no onus for any manual intervention at this point. So that confirmation timeout is basically what is the amount of time that we're willing to wait before we say this transaction is expired, or before we now automatically assign this transaction to an AML officer. So it is not the time that the compliance officer has to go in and check the transaction. It is simply the time that we're going to wait for a response from the counterparty. And then after that response, what happens next? You can either set it to expire, and then we have a rule where if it's been set to that status, we can automatically approve it, or we can modify that rule to assign it to a specific compliance officer who then gets a notification and goes ahead to process the transaction. So that should answer that question as well. Also, since we're on the topic of AML officers reviewing, one thing to note is if you create a transaction and at any point in time, before we send the transaction to the counterparty, we discover that there's an AML hit. Let's say the name is a PEP name, whatever. We would wait for your AML officer to manually review that body of work before we send it to the transaction. So say, for example, your client's trying to send funds to a terrorist. We wouldn't even exchange that data in the first place if your compliance officer confirms that this is, a bad client. So there will be no PII attempt to even exchange it if there is a hit when you create the transaction. So that also protects you from, again, interacting with risky VASPs or VASP in jurisdictions that you don't like, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Does your product communicate with different solutions provider, for example, Nota Bene?
Well, I think Emeka would be the best person, but you can chip in on this. Basically, we do communicate in terms of with different protocols, not only our own of the SumSub network, and then other, let's say, solutions providers. We're just basically considering more and more throughout time, and we're in discussions in order to integrate with different ones apart from the ones we already have, right? So even the one you mentioned is also, of course, something being considered, but probably Emeka can say more about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much it. We are in discussions with, and if you're familiar with the travel ecosystem, there's a few names that stand out. Trust, and most importantly, Nota Bene, GTR Code, and and us. So if there's 5 major protocols, we are integrated with 3, and we're in conversations with the other 2 as well. So that should happen. I don't want to put a timeline on it, but sometime soon.
Thank you, guys. Will sharing crypto addresses between users for incoming transactions, deposit addresses, pose any difficulty in SumSub integration or travel rule compliance?
Yeah, this one is tricky. The short answer is that yes, it will pose some difficulty because the way the regulations have been set up, if you think about it, it's been very similar to the SWIFT system in traditional finance, where no 2 users can have the same bank account number. It's supposed to be unique. Now, there's some business models where you share addresses, which is fine or was fine before the regulation came into place, but it is something that will be a bit difficult. There will be workarounds, but obviously we're not going to sit here and recommend workarounds when we've interpreted something from the regulatory standpoint to mean X, and in you're doing Y because of your business model. So yes, we will be difficult. We don't recommend it. But at the same time, if that is what you have in the short term, we can work with you while you figure out plans for the long term to ensure that every user has a unique wallet addresses. Wallet address. I believe to create wallet addresses on the blockchain is somewhat free. It's just like, again, the technical investment you have to do on your side. So we're well aware of those nuances, but it would be a bit tricky, to be honest, just for full transparency.
Our firm is interested in providing merchant on-ramping services to legal entities. In our scenario, a legal entity serviced by a CASP uses our platform as a ramp to credit their user balances in crypto. So originator personal info is provided to us by the legal entity, and that person is also the receiver of the transaction at the address hosted by the CASP. Does SumSub support such specific scenarios?
So this is more like an intermediary VASP scenario from what I understand here. So your firm is a middleman that probably takes fiat and then credits crypto, but most likely from the same individual. The short answer is yes, our system supports those unique cases. I think for us and then for you as well, it's also something you need to consider because travel rule at its core is built on some other legal requirements like KYC and anti-money laundering. So while it's just an exchange of data, there's certain things that make travel rule work. For example, you should have screened or done KYC on the originator. So there's rules there that state that you should have screened your originator, which is your client. If you're an intermediary VASP, you would need to figure out how you're going to comply, even though those are not your users and you didn't have that interaction with them. But again, those are outside the topic of travel exchanging the data points. I'm just painting like a broader picture for you to consider. But yes, we can support that once we have the data points of the VASPs, of the users, and so on and so forth.
Does the user need to pay a network fee to sign the message to prove the hosted wallet belongs to him?
Not a network fee for context. A network fee basically means, like, let's say you're saying like gas fees, so not necessarily a network fee. Signing digital signatures are free. However, our solution at its core does come at a price point. So for every transaction that you sign with us, it's almost like the fees we assign for travel road as well. So there's a fee attached to that because there's a cost to it. But it is not a network fee. It is not dependent on gas price on Ethereum or Solana, none of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important to consider that some of the rules that you can see on our system with a dollar sign tend to mean an additional cost just because they go through additional providers, et cetera, et cetera. So unhosted wallet verification is one of those. So yeah, it every time that the unhosted wallet verification is conducted, it is an additional fee from our side, but of course not really like a network fee or gas fee.
Okay. We're almost out of time, so we have 7 minutes left. We'll take just 3 more questions before we wrap up. We have implemented the travel rule, and so far, in our records, many of the transactions hit counterparty VASP not found. May I know why?
It's of course it's a common blockchain issue, I would say, not really a tool issue. And basically, well, first of all, I believe that so we're of course checking addresses based on blockchain analytics, right? One of the ways. And of course, as we said before, there's a lot of new addresses being constantly created, and therefore not everything is transparent in terms of, or not immediately reflective of the existing addresses of each let's say exchange and of addresses that are just created, right? So therefore, if I just create an address right now on Binance or any other exchange and try to do an attribution for that, it's going to be quite difficult to attribute it immediately because it's just a newly created address. That's why we came up with the concept of the wallet address book, in order to be able to target and have a bigger registry of addresses that could not be identified by the blockchain analytics providers, right? That are basically looking at things based on what's sent and based on what's received in the blockchain, and that being reflected as a ledger system. So yeah, it's a common issue for sure, and that is why, to tackle that, what we are actually doing as a mechanism too is we're not only enabling when counterparty VASP is not found immediate unhosted wallet verification necessarily, but also we're working on kind of self-declaration forms as well that can be triggered in the case where, let's say, the user actually firmly is sure that the address they're sending funds to actually could belong to a VASP, right? So as Emeka said before, self-declaration forms are a thing that we're actively working on as a mechanism, first of all, of course, for the unhosted wallet verification also, so that the user, instead of having to connect the wallet through what we're doing now that I explained, can just sign like this kind of form certifying it's their own wallet, but also potentially, the user certifying that the address they're sending funds to is actually, even though it's not been found, it is still a VASP, and certifying what VASP it is, et cetera, like a kind of self-declaration form, not only for unhosted wallet, but actually just certifying that it belongs to a specific VASP, right? So we're trying to basically cover as many scenarios as possible, including that one that you've mentioned now, which is counterparty VASP not found, but actually belonging with a high likelihood probably to a VASP.
Yeah, I think also just to chip in as well, like the way we've seen some of our like most successful clients tackle this problem, because it is a problem in the industry, is somewhere on their interface or somewhere in their user experience journey, they ask their users, which VASP they're sending funds to. So if you're not doing that, once you start doing that, that would also be a key factor that would reduce the number of counterparty VASP not found, because sometimes your users know that the beneficiary is on crypto.com or it's on Coinbase. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. In the cases that they do, again, you have to look at your journey and implement this additional field as well. That should help, but there is no silver bullet to solve this problem. It is an existential problem of crypto. But again, because Travel is also very new, these are some of the things that we're gonna see for the near future. But that doesn't mean that we're not trying to work ways around it with some of our solutions. But yeah, just sharing that as well, that you might need to look inward at how you send us that data, and then if possible, add those identifiers if your user knows the VASPs. That would also be cheaper for you as well, just to put that out there.
Thank you, Mecca. Related to the unhosted wallet verification, what are the best practices to handle those incoming transfers from unhosted wallets that are owned by third parties, and where your customer is unable to digitally sign the wallet address?
This one is tricky because, from a legal perspective, like we've combed through the documentation and all whatnot, there isn't really, the regulators are quite tight-lipped about what should happen here. So that's something that we're wary of. Any things that we suggest are just going to be like workarounds, I would say. But basically, the way we've seen it happen is, some clients adopt what we call like a risk-based approach, which basically means that, in the event that it's an unhosted wallet to a third party, so maybe the names differ, or your user indicates that this is a third party person, like not myself, there's some level of, oh, let's check the wallet address if it is risky or not. Let's check exposures to like sanctions. Let's check the amount thresholds. And then we make a calculated decision on whether to approve or ask our user for more information. Those would typically be handled on a case-by-case basis, but ideally you should have some form of risk-based approach automation that you put in place for those kind of scenarios. So please take note of that. And then if you also need help setting up some of these risk-based approaches as well, we're here, we're happy to help, and we'll figure it out together.
And the last question for today is, where can I find the registration form in SumSub dashboard?
Not the dashboard. You would have to reach out to your CSM.
Yeah. So normally this is something that we do as standard. We send to you this VASP registration link to start with as part of the general onboarding process. So if you haven't received it, just we'll be more than happy to send it to you. Also, by the way, it's quite common that we have an automated system in the dashboard where you should be able to see a link to actually carry out the registration directly in your dashboard. But if you don't have that, we're more than happy to send it to you, of course, without a problem. Maybe just I would suggest message your CSM, your customer success manager, for the link to the VASP registration form. But that is a very good question for everybody, for sure. Whoever hasn't filled in the VASP registration form, it is very, very important for an efficient integration process, 100%. So please ping us whenever needed, and we'll be more than happy to send it to you so you can carry it out, or just reach out to your customer success manager. We will immediately send it.
Alvaro and Mega, thanks a lot for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. And before we say goodbye, I would like to ask you guys to fill in a quick survey to provide your feedback. It really matters for us to make the demonstrations and the webinars and the workshops even better than now. Thank you so much for staying with us. And I believe that's it. That's a wrap up for today. We hope you found it valuable. And until next time, take care and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.